Because look, when you say 1 in 3 Americans believes that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, that means we're talking 100 million people. Many of them claim they're hearing messages from these extraterrestrials. Why are all of these messages delivered telepathically? These guys crossed light years of space and they can't work a webcam. They can't work a radio. They can't modulate a light. They have to communicate telepathically. Okay, all right, let's say that that's true.
That's the real reason for the repeal of net neutrality, actually, so they can talk to animals.
Exactly, so that their brain waves aren't being throttled by Verizon.
Of the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Sam Johnson, and we got a loaded episode today, so pay attention and don't click off the tab. I know you always click off the tab when you watch the show. Just watch the video. I put a lot of time in editing this, okay? So please just watch the show. All right, now that you're back and you clicked on the right tab, we are joined by Josh Peck and Derek Gilbert to talk about their brand new book that I have right here, The Day the Earth Stands Still. It is, it's a handful. Let me just tell you. Let me put it that way. It is fantastic. If you ever have any questions about aliens and how they relate to Christianity, well, this is the book for you, let me tell you, because it goes much deeper than just the demonic aspect that everyone always likes to cover when they talk about these things. So, without further ado, Mr. Peck and Mr. Gilbert, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you doing?
Doing fine. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm doing great, and it's a joy to have you guys. So, before we get into the book, I just want to say, Derek, how dare you want to celebrate the Christ's birthday or the celebration of his birth? What is, and furthermore, to back it up with facts? Well, come on, man. What the heck?
Oh, Nimrod tree, oh, Nimrod tree. No, I don't mean to be facetious, and I don't want to mock anybody.
Yes, you do.
I don't want to mock anybody who really feels led by the Holy Spirit to avoid the holiday. I get that. Sharon and I did for several years until we started digging into the actual history behind it. So I don't have a problem with people who are following where they are led. But when it crosses the line to say, okay, this is how I'm led, and you had better be led this way too, otherwise you're a pagan, then I think we're going to have an issue. And what I hope we can do on this issue is agree to disagree. If people don't want to celebrate Christmas, that's fine. I'm not going to say you better celebrate Christmas or you're a pagan. You know, I understand that. But I am not suggesting that we approve of and all of the pagan and commercial practices and customs that have attached themselves to Christmas over the centuries. But God does not have a problem with celebrating the birth, the Word made flesh.
Absolutely.
I mean, if he did, the angels, the heavenly choir of angels, the host of heaven would not have been singing for joy on that night. Now, did the early church get the date correct? No. December 25th is the wrong date. But they didn't pick the date for pagan reasons. It was an innocent mistake. So
think about it this way. I got 2 points on this, and then we'll move on to the book. We didn't. This is not a Christmas book. We didn't
it was
write about.
Supposed to be a joke. I'm sorry.
Well, you've opened a floodgate.
I know.
A lot of times the example is used. Well, what if your wife celebrated your birthday on the wrong day and didn't use your right name or something like that? You know, we've all heard that. Okay, let's not think about it like that. Let's think about it like this. What if your young son who doesn't know anything because he's just a kid, meaning well, tried to celebrate your birthday and got the date wrong, or called you dad instead of whatever your actual proper English name is? Would you be mad at him, or would you think, wow, he's trying, that's really sweet, it's the thought that counts kind of thing? Now, of course, that's not perfect theology, and we're not claiming that, but it's just to say that there are different ways to look at this. And like Derek said, I see two camps, and it's not Christmas and not Christmas. I see one camp that doesn't care what you do and says, well, to each his own, the Holy Spirit's going to lead you how the Holy Spirit's going to lead you, and celebrate it or not, either way is fine with me. It's up to the individual. Then I see the other camp, which is more into this groupthink thing, where if you don't do it exactly the way they do it, which is just don't celebrate it at all, you got to have all the, then you're not a Christian, you're not part of the group, you're not part of the brotherhood or sisterhood of Christians. I don't want to be a part of that group. I want to be a part of the group that looks at the individual, looks at the content of character, and says, look, you're honoring God, and clearly Jesus Christ is your Savior, so we have that in common. We're going to spend eternity together, so may as well try to get along now. Yeah. So that's all I'll say about it, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's ultimately do your research and figure out what you believe and know why you believe it. And the thing about Christmas trees is they have wonderful lights, and you know what else have lights? UFOs have lights, and that's my wonderful transition back to the actual topic, which is aliens and the disclosure that you guys talked about in your book. So Josh, we're going to start out with you, and let's just start talking about the very physical evidence of aliens and UFOs in our culture. You spent a large segment of the book talking about WikiLeaks and the Podesta emails back and forth, and so kind of expand on that. Like, what does that tell us?
Oh yeah, and this was actually really interesting. So recently, earlier this year, and even last year, we got this big WikiLeaks dump of a bunch of Podesta emails. For those who aren't familiar, John Podesta, he's part of the DNC. He was like special advisor for Hillary Clinton, or I don't know the exact title, but he helped in her. He was a campaign manager, I think. Yes. Really high up there individual. And when the WikiLeaks came out, most people focused on the Pizzagate stuff, and that's fine. People should research that and try to find out what's going on. But under the radar, there were a lot of emails that had to do with UFOs, aliens, ETI, which is extraterrestrial intelligence. So it's moved on from just extraterrestrials to extraterrestrial intelligences for important reasons that I'll get into in a minute. But in these emails, we discovered what Podesta really thinks about how he interprets the UFO phenomena, the things that interest him as opposed to the things that don't interest him. So he was heavily in contact with Edgar Mitchell and Terry Mansfield. Edgar Mitchell's passed on now. He was the sixth man on the moon. He was an astronaut. He was big into the alien UFO stuff. And Terry Mansfield, their interpretation of the alien UFO phenomenon fell right in line with one another, which is basically they're not something from another planet. They're something from a contiguous universe, or what we might call a parallel universe or an alternate reality. That's what they are, and they're obedient to God, and they're Catholics. So anybody that we're referencing right now, just put Catholic. They're all Catholic. So they're obedient to God. So generally, Catholics will look at the Bible and say, well, that's the God that we worship, and of course, there could even be blowback with that, but they're not talking about a Buddhist God or Allah or anything like that. They're obedient to God, and they want to help humanity. They're just waiting for us to ask. Like, haven't humans been asking like for forever? They're powerful enough to destroy us with their consciousness, yet they choose not to do that because they're spiritually evolved, though that's never really defined what spiritually evolved means. Now, there are things called celestials in the universe, which are aliens from another planet, what we would say are extraterrestrials. But the ETI, the extraterrestrial intelligences, say that those are actually the bad guys. So it's this weird interpretation that Terry Mansfield, it sounds like, though she's never used this term, it sounds like she's channeling these beings. I don't know if there's ever been any kind of one-to-one physical type of contact or interaction. It wasn't specific, but she's somehow getting messages from these things. And so that's kind of what the I on the ETI is all about. They're not just ETs. They're not just physical beings from another planet. They're ETIs, or they're intelligences somewhere out there in the ether. So it's a weird interpretation, and it's not the interpretation that we take issue with. It's the lack of evidence. There's no evidence for it. It's just, this is what they've told Terry, and I don't think Terry Mansfield is lying. I believe that she has had contact with these beings, and she was told this. I think the beings, the ETI, are lying to her because, again, there's no evidence. So the main inspiration for that chapter in the book was to say, okay, if official disclosure ever actually does happen, if there's ever a point in the future where either the government owns up to something or something is leaked or released where the government has to say, yeah, we knew about this, or if there's something as extreme as the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is what the title of the book's based on. If a UFO lands on the White House lawn and somebody comes out of it, however it might play out, if an official disclosure event happens, somebody is going to be there to interpret it later. The news agencies are going to call on people like John Podesta and if he were alive, Edgar Mitchell, people from the Ancient Aliens crowd. They're going to take whoever is most popular because, again, they're still going to worry about ratings, and they're going to take whoever is popular, who's ever been talking about official disclosure, and they're going to ask those people to interpret it for the rest of us. So knowing what their worldview is and knowing what their interpretation is now, that's important because that could play a heavy role later. So Podesta, in his emails, he was more respondent to the weird ETI stuff. Like that was the only thing that he would actually kind of respond to in emails, and actually tried to set up meetings. There's no evidence whether a meeting actually took place, but he was at least responding to it. Now, he had other UFO researchers that are even in the government and even had access to high government officials who took a more scientific approach and said, here would be a good way to find out what these things are, without saying what they are or without trying to define it for John Podesta, but just saying you could look through the statistics of these areas and these areas, see what matches up, actual scientific, statistical type of stuff. John Podesta wasn't interested in that at all. He never responded to that kind of stuff. It was only the really weird stuff that has no evidence backing it. That's the case with a lot of these people. So what really inspired that chapter for me, Tom DeLonge's another one, the singer of Blink 182. Mm-hmm. He's another one that would absolutely be called to offer his opinion if official disclosure ever happened. It's important to know what their worldview is now because they're going to be defining it for the rest of the world. The world's going to be presented with facts, but it's how we interpret those. And usually facts are interpreted by whoever we're watching on TV, whoever we're watching in the news. Look at the CNN audience. Look at any leftist, any liberal, and there you go. And I'm not saying that we're immune to that because conservatives can absolutely fall into that trap too. But that's what's going to happen. So that's why I wanted to write that chapter. I went through every single email. I put them in the book. And I pulled out all the points of importance. So if people get the book, they're going to see all of these points. Also, I should mention that right now at officialdisclosure.com, people can get this book and get over $300 of other materials. There's a couple of books by Dr. Michael Hyde, book Unraveling the Multiverse. There's a DVD set, Operation Stargate, that's never been, or Project Stargate, excuse me, that's never been released before. Full of interviews from Chuck Missler, the late Chris Putnam, Paul McGuire, Joyce Aarons, and just a whole plethora of people. 12 different people. Official Disclosure audio series. If people go to officialdisclosure.com, they can pick that up, and it's just in time for Christmas, like what we were talking about.
yeah. Let's not go back there, please. No, but the thing I liked about that chapter was it just showed how real this alien phenomenon is to especially people up in our higher governments, because it's a very natural reaction for people to be like, oh, aliens, I don't want to talk about it. It's stupid. It's not part of my world. I don't need to worry about it. And especially Christians have that view. And Derek, you did a really good job in the beginning of the book talking about why this movement is so important and the way people's minds are being corrupted. You touched on things like Hollywood and the way they're kind of corrupting people's minds. And so how is Christian, how do we react to things like that?
I think we need to look at what Americans believe. And there have been a couple of surveys that we put together that I think paint a pretty clear picture of where we are and why this is an important topic for Christians to address. In 2012, the National Geographic Channel was launching a new show called Chasing UFOs or something to that effect. But they commissioned a survey of American adults to find out what they believed about extraterrestrials. In fact, there's a new survey that Tom Horn just posted at SkyWatchTV.com today as we record this, a global survey of adults in Europe, North America, and most of the technologically advanced world, and found that about half of the adults in the world believe in the existence of extraterrestrials, believe that ET is actually visiting Earth. 5 years ago, National Geographic found that 77%, 77% of Americans believe there's evidence of ET visitation. 36% are convinced that we're being visited by ET. Now, when you combine that with the Barna Group research on what American Christians believe, or what Americans believe about God is maybe more accurate, you find that only 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview. And as Barna defines that, that means believing in 6 basic points of Christian theology, like Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life. You can't earn your way into heaven. Satan is a literal entity, not a concept or a force. Things like that. Christianity 101. So 36% of Americans believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials. 10% of Americans believe in God as he's defined in the Bible. All right. So Americans are almost 4 times more likely to believe in ET than in Yahweh. That's why Christians need to pay attention to this, because many of these people, especially if you're saying, 77% believe there's a chance we're being visited by extraterrestrials, some of those people are sitting next to you in your church pew. Okay? So we need to address this. It's an alternate religion. It addresses the 3 big questions, and we got this from Gary Bates of Creation Ministries International. The 3 big questions that people have wondered about since the beginning of time. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens to us when we die? And because people are likely to believe their eyes in those strange lights in the sky, more than they're willing to believe the words from a dusty book that most Americans have never even opened, they're turning to the extraterrestrial, the UFO phenomenon, and the possibility that maybe those ancient aliens guys on the History Channel are really right. Maybe we were created. This has been a long process by the enemy. And in the book, we start with the ancient Greek philosophers. I mean, the scientific method was created in like the 7th century BC by Thales, the Greek philosopher Thales. So we're going back to about the time Nebuchadnezzar was sacking Jerusalem. Greek philosophers were saying, the only way we can find out what is actually true is to observe it and quantify it and try to repeat the experiment. And that was followed by the atomists. Everything is the product of atoms that just bump together by accident. Everything, even spirit and soul, is created from atoms. Then you've got the Epicureans, who Paul debated on Mars Hill, by the way, who believe that because we're just the product of accident and that when we die, we just cease to be, the only goal in life is to get through it with as little pain as possible. How's that for a morbid worldview? We come from nothing, we go to nothing, and our only goal is to try not to be hurt. No wonder Paul had fun with these guys on Mars Hill. I would love to go back in time and watch that debate. But that worldview, that we come from nothing, we go to nothing, is sadly. It actually was kind of pushed to the side by the emergence of the gospel in the 1st century. But it reemerged around the time of the Enlightenment. And the idea, once again, that nothing exists if we can't observe it and quantify it and measure it. In other words, if we humans cannot perceive it with our limited, finite, fallible senses, it doesn't exist. That's what the scientific method teaches. That's what our children, our grandchildren are being taught. That is called modernist thought. Now, as evidenced by some things that I've talked about on SkyWatch TV this past week, we've moved from modernism into postmodernism, which is a transition from believing that only science can identify truth for us to postmodernism, which is there is no such thing as truth. Truth is objective. Your truth is different from my truth. And truth is not objective, it's subjective. Subjective, right. Everyone creates their own truth and their own reality. Like, okay, try that out standing in the middle of the streets. It's either you or it's the bus. It's not both of you. You cannot wish it into the cornfield and create your own reality. It's a self-refuting worldview. If they say there is no such thing as truth, really, is that true? Think about that.
Yeah.
But that's where our students are today. Well, anyway, in this environment, the existence of, but it hasn't answered those questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And what happens to us when we die? Well, you bring out an ET God, a God who simply is a visitor from another planet with better technology. And then suddenly, hey, the lie that the serpent, the Nakash, told Adam and Eve in the garden becomes plausible. Wow, if we just get better gizmos, if we have better tech, then we can be as gods. And I think that's why the ancient alien theory, that's why is so popular. That's why the UFO phenomenon is so appealing, why it's so alluring to people. It's why people will travel thousands of miles to attend UFO conferences in places like Joshua Tree, California, Roswell, New Mexico, McMinnville, Oregon. It's why people, decades later are still trying to figure out what actually happened at Rendlesham Forest in England. So we deal with all of that. But again, when you get right down to it, the bottom line is this. It's an alternate religion, one that holds out the promise of apotheosis, that we can be as gods. And best of all, because God is not defined as one who establishes a definite moral code. There is no, hey, there's no guilt. There's no requirements on me. I don't have to change the way I'm living.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an alternate religion. It is a lie, and it is based on the oldest lie in the book: "Ye shall be as gods."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have ministries focused on Muslims, and we have ministries focused on Jewish. As the last episode, I interviewed Rabbi Zev Parat, and we talked about his mission to reach out to the Jewish people. And so as Christians, there's this other religion forming that follow these UFOs and these aliens. And so we have to, if we want to be able to reach people with the gospel, and we want to be able to reach all people, we have to understand why they think this, and what do we think about the subjects to accurately reflect them. And Josh, you come from a new age background, and you kind of dabble in this stuff a little bit. So can you speak on your experiences from being in that world?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And this is actually a pretty good question, because when we were on Coast to Coast, I started this story way too late into the program and I had to be cut off before I had a chance to really say much about it. So my lasting thought on the Coast to Coast interview was, yeah, I used to do New Age stuff. Oh, you got to be careful with that. And then that was it. Well, we love George. I mean, he's held by time constraints, so he's got to do what he's got to do. But yeah, so that was just kind of funny. But yeah, so I technically I was raised really traditional Baptist, almost Southern Baptist, but I was in Michigan, so as south as Michigan can be in the Baptist world. But the kind of ideas were really Southern Baptist, really legalistic. And I'm not saying anything bad about the Baptists. Some of my best friends are Baptist, and I don't consider myself a Baptist anymore, but I still love them.
All Baptists look alike to me. I don't know.
They are all Carl Gallups. I wish, right? I mean, shoot, at least Carl thinks outside of the box once in a while.
Yeah. Jeez, man, making a whole group of people really angry, all right? If you're Baptist, we don't hate you, okay? Jeez.
So I owe a lot to the Baptists, because they were the ones that were the first to introduce me to Jesus, and I was brought up in a biblical kind of environment because of that. It was just a lot of the interpretations. There wasn't enough backing for even a curious 12-year-old to be satisfied with it. Mm-hmm. So I was always curious about aliens and UFOs. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I was curious about it. It's a weird thing, and the Bible doesn't seem to say anything. So when I would ask that, at church, that was my biggest theological question, and I didn't get it answered until basically this year, at least not in full. but until research for this book. But so in a lot of ways, this book is kind of a conclusion to that part of my life, which is awesome. But so my biggest question was, could life exist on other planets? Can aliens exist? Can they exist? And where are they in the Bible, if at all? And, basically the answer that I would get was, well, it's all demonic, Josh. Don't you know that? No. where does it say that, in the Bible? Because, you would think if you tell somebody that, the very next question obviously is going to be, where do you get that from? So I would ask that, and then I was told, well, you just got to take it on faith. And it's like, but it's not based on anything. Like, it's based on somebody's, if it's not based in the Bible, and just saying that, well, it's not in the Bible, so it's not real. That is so not good enough. I'm not in the Bible. I'm real. There's a ton of stuff that's not in the Bible that's not real, or that is real. Toilet paper. Cars and the future and any kind of existence past 70 or 80 AD. There's a ton of stuff. So a lot of that was really unsatisfying to me. And it kind of started me on this path that kind of made me uninterested in church, because it didn't just stop with the alien stuff. It was a lot of things that I would ask about that was kind of the go-to. Well, when the pastor or when whoever I was asking didn't know the answer, they couldn't just say, I don't know, because I guess that would show them as flawed and human. But it always led to, well, you got to have faith, Josh. You just got to have faith. The one time I got an I don't know, and I will remember this forever. It was the first thing that I wrote about my very first book in the introduction, because this meant a lot to me. I was staying the night at my grandma and grandpa's house, and I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I remember asking my grandma, she was getting me to bed, and I remember asking her, how do we know that that the Baptists are right? There's a lot of other churches, and they're saved, and they love Jesus and they believe in God. How do we know that the Baptists are right and that not one of them might be right, on everything? And she said, Josh, I really don't know. And she didn't give me the you got to have faith line. She didn't try to make up she just said, I don't know. I just don't have the answer to that. And I was satisfied with that, because at least it was honest. And so I really appreciated that. But that was really the only time that I can remember that I actually got an honest answer. All the other times it was, you got to take it on faith. You just got to have faith. And to me, it wasn't having faith in God. To me, it was they're asking me to have faith that their interpretation is right. Of course, I was a kid and I wouldn't have known to put it in those terms, but that was basically my issue with it. So after I was 12, my mom and I moved, and I lived further away from my grandparents, and my mom told me that I didn't have to go to church anymore if I didn't want to. So of course I was like, woo, no church. All right. So I just stopped going. And so when I was now all throughout this time, I was having problems with sleep paralysis, which was another thing that I would have questions about, and nobody could give me a straight answer. It was, well, Josh, you're just having bad dreams. And I would try, it's not bad dreams. It's like not that. Mm-hmm. When things are moved around in my room, like I'm not dreaming that. So I had a lot of problem with that. Even my mom was telling me it was bad dreams. I later found out years and years later that she had the same thing and just didn't want to tell me because she didn't want to scare me. But that would actually have provided some level of comfort to know that I wasn't alone in it. Mm-hmm. So when I was 18, I moved out. As fast as I could get out of there. I didn't get along with my stepdad, and I moved out. And I knew that I was going to have this sleep paralysis problem no matter where I lived. So when I would move in with a friend or something, I kind of went from place to place for a while. I would tell them, look, if you hear me like yell or like make noises in the middle of the night, just ignore me. I'm fine. And I just said that I get bad dreams. If they would ask about it, then I would tell them about the sleep paralysis stuff. But I didn't say like, well, I'm attacked by demons at night, even though that's what I thought it was. And I still do think that's what it was. Mm-hmm. But so eventually I ended up moving in with a friend and his wife, and she was a Wiccan, and I hadn't gone to church since I was 12. And so I went through the whole thing. I said, look, if I'm going to live here, you might hear some noises or something. And I get really bad dreams. And she's like, well, what are your dreams about? And I was like, well, all right, to be honest, they're not really dreams. I have sleep paralysis. I can't move. And so we started talking about it. And eventually I started to realize that she was open to the idea of this not being something in my head and actually being something real. So after a while, it was like, okay, well, here's what I really think's happening. And I told her that, I think it's demonic. I think I'm actually being physically attacked. I don't know how to stop it. I don't really know what it is. I've never been given a straight answer, and it's just something I deal with. And it happens a couple times a week. And so she asked me if I ever heard of astral projection, which at the time I'd never heard of that. And I had said, no, I don't know what that is. And she gave me a book. It had like the corniest title. It was like Astral Projection for Beginners or something like that. It wasn't anything like mystic or mysterious. It was just like, like astral projection for dummies. It was something like that. So, but her idea was, well, if you can learn how to do that, and for those who aren't familiar, anybody watching this show should be familiar with this because I hosted the show for 120 episodes. They should know this story, but you've also gained a lot more viewers, which is awesome. But so in case anybody isn't familiar, astral projection, some people believe, mostly New Agers and like Buddhists and some of the Eastern religions, they believe that if you meditate and concentrate, you can leave your own body. So, you project into the astral realm. That's what they call it, which is basically like it's sort of like a parallel reality to the real world. It is the real world, but it's from like on the other side of the veil, we might say. So her idea was maybe if you can learn how to do this, then you can at least get away or defend yourself or maybe you'll have some control over the situation. So at the time, again, I hadn't been to church since I was 12. And even then I didn't have any, questions answered. I thought, well, that's a great idea. At least finally here is somebody that's validating what I believe in. They're not telling me it's just dreams. They're not trying to say I'm schizophrenic like a couple of people did. They're not trying to say all this stuff. She's actually the first person that's, with me in believing that this is a real thing that's happening and is providing a solution. It's a wacky one, but it's something. So for the next 6 months, that book was like my Bible. Like I got so familiar with everything. I became a vegetarian because it said in the book, if you don't eat meat, you have an easier time astral projecting. And it didn't even say why. It provided no reason for that. It just said it. So I believed it. And I'm from Michigan, as you are, Sam. We eat meat like all the time. We don't eat fruit or vegetables. Why would you want to eat that when you can have venison?
Let's get it.
I love it. So like becoming a vegetarian was really difficult, but I did it. And then after about 6 months, for the first time, I actually got it to work. And I wanted to test it. So in the astral realm or whatever, I went into another room and overheard a conversation that my roommates were having that I couldn't have heard from the room that I was in because it was too far away. The next day I confirmed that was what they were talking about. So that was enough for me to kind of get excited about. Now, by this time I had learned there's no way I'm going to be able to do this during sleep paralysis. It takes so much concentration. There's just no way it's going to happen when you're being like attacked. But I was already hooked in. I was already addicted to it. It made me feel, different and special and unique. And, all the things I should have felt as a Christian already, because I have the spirit of the living God living, inside of me. Like, how much more special did I need it to be? But I didn't really have any kind of understanding of that. So over time, that was kind of my doorway into New Age. And I got more and more involved in it, remote viewing, and I could go on for hours about that. But aliens were a part of that too. So because aliens are a big time subject in New Age beliefs, but they kind of have a spiritualized view of it. It's not like a scientific, they're from other planets. It's partly that, but it's partly they want to communicate with us and they want all this garbage, basically like spirit guide kind of stuff. And but at least it was something. So that I eventually, just from doing the astral projection thing for so long, I didn't know what was actually happening. Was I was opening doorways into the other realm or into the spirit realm or whatever, and things were starting to come through in my waking life, and it was getting so bad that my wife and I, Christina and I, were being harassed in the middle of the day. Jackie was just born. And, you know, she was like just under a year or maybe a year old. And she was having these horrific night terrors where we could not calm her down. And by the way, since getting out of this, she's never had a single one of those again. She's 6. She'll be 7 in a couple of months. And she's never had another one of those. But I mean, it was like terrifying because she would just scream and scream. And it was different than normal baby stuff. So I started to realize that, you know, maybe what I'm doing isn't the right way because we're kind of literally going through hell here. So for the first time in maybe ever, I said a actual legitimate, honest prayer to God. And I asked him for help. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm screwed up, but I don't know how to, I have nothing. What do I do? Shortly after that, I happened to turn the TV on. I was scrolling through channels and I found this show called It's Supernatural with Sid Roth, and I decided to watch it. And it really appealed to me as like being in new age stuff. Like it was really super. I mean, it's called It's Supernatural, so of course, you know, it was really supernatural. And it really appealed to me, and I started watching it. And there was a guest named L.A. Marzulli, and I'd never heard of him before. And here he was talking about aliens. He was talking about the mark of the beast, which was another thing that since a kid I was really interested in. And he was talking about alien implants, and he was basically answering like all the questions that I had about aliens back when I was a kid. And that really hooked me in. So I started looking up everything I could about LA, and through that I found out about Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and, you know, all the people that I get to work with now. I found out about all these people and learned about this amazing community. And it really drew me in because it was answering questions, and I was gaining, for the first time ever, a level of peace about it. And so my wife and I, through looking into LA stuff and everybody else's stuff, we actually started doing Bible studies together, which we had never done before. We started praying together, which we had never done before. And it came to the point that I started to look back at my life and say, you know, there was never a time that I actually really submitted to Christ. You know, that I was kind of like Christian in name only. I never really actually submitted to Christ and turned my, you know, gave my life to him, to live for him and follow him. So I did that, and I prayed, and I told, and I think that was when I actually got saved for real. That was at least when it was my choice, and when I knew exactly what I was doing. Well, shortly after that, I ended up emailing L.A. Marzulli and asking him what to do about this problem, this demonic problem, because these things were still harassing us night and day. It was just a really bad situation. So I emailed him. I didn't expect to get an email back, but Peggy, his wife, emailed me back basically immediately and said that, gave me LA's phone number and said that he would like to talk to me. And so I called him. He gave me a crash course in spiritual warfare. And he said, that was the first that I heard, how he said, well, with you astral projecting, you were actually opening portals to the other side. And you didn't know, but that's what was happening. That's how these things are getting in. So you use the name of Jesus to cast out the entities, but also use the name of Jesus to close those doors. And so I did all that. Me and Christina did all that night, and it stopped. It was just peace in the house. it just stopped. And so over time, so that's what gave me the Nephilim Genesis 6 answer to aliens. I still had questions about it, but at least a large portion of it was answered.
Yeah.
But so going forward in what led to this book, that was the basis of my original question when I was 12 years old. Are aliens in the Bible? This at least provided some kind of answer for that, but it still didn't answer the overarching question: can life exist on another planet? You know, okay, so I get it. Alien abductions and UFOs, it's demonic. I can actually support that with the Bible now. Like, I understand how that works. But what about the bigger question? Can life exist out there somewhere? Is it possible? Did God create life? And if he did, is there any chance that they might interact with us someday? And if they do, how do we know the difference? How do we know if it's something that God created that's real and just isn't a part of this plan of salvation that Jesus has in place for us? Or what if it's something demonic? You know, I mean, I don't think that it's good enough to just say it's all demonic, because again, I was 12 years old and it wasn't good enough for me.
Right.
So what's the answer to that? And that's really what for me, my main motivation in taking part in this book was to try to get to the bottom of that answer. Can life exist elsewhere in the universe? And would it, if so, is it possible that it could be removed from anything demonic or anything that we're dealing with here on Earth? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's that story.
Yeah, well, that's a great testimony, and it really speaks to why we need to understand this, because there are people that are just like you, grown up with these questions, and if we don't have answers for them, they're going to turn down the New Age movement, especially now with the postmodern movement. It's such an easy trap to fall into because Christians are lazy and they don't like to do research. They don't like to know things. They just like to be like, oh, faith will handle it all, which is, yeah, faith is great, but without works, it's not going to do a whole lot, and the works is doing the research. And the whole New Age movement is really rooted in a lot of these Crowleyan aspects of our world, which, Derek, you talked a lot about in the book as well, and even ties to the Catholic Church. I mean, even Catholic people in the Vatican are saying, well, if a alien came, then we would probably see if we can convert it, and if we couldn't, we might just trust its judgment. Like, that's, I mean, if you ever read Exo Vaticana, I would strongly suggest doing that. But Derek, yeah, you talked a lot about the Crowleyan influence in the alien culture. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, starting back with the Greek philosophers, again, we see that this move to get mankind in general away from the idea that the gods were real, that the gods existed, and that we were the product of this supernatural act of creation. And of course, the pagans aren't believing in Yahweh as the creator; they're believing but in general, starting with the Greek philosophers, and their influence really came back around the time of the Enlightenment. The irony of all this, of course, is that the influence of Islam from the 7th century until about the 14th, 15th century, when Constantinople fell, kept a lot of the Greeks and their Greek thought, Greek philosophers, away from Europe, because crossing the Mediterranean when the Ottoman Empire was at the peak of its power was a dangerous thing. So the gospel held sway, and the influence of these Greek philosophers who believed that we were just a product of an accident, and the gods aren't real, and if they are, they're just the product of these accidental interactions between atoms, and when we die, there's really nothing left. But when Constantinople fell in 1453 to the Ottomans, suddenly these Greeks had to flee for their lives, and they headed west, brought with them their ideas, hence the Enlightenment, hence the idea that science is the answer to everything, modernist thought, then postmodern thought. But in the 19th century, and really backing up a little bit in the 18th century, we saw the beginnings of a return to a spiritual interpretation of the world in which we live. Emanuel Swedenborg was one who was very influential. He was a Christian, claimed to be anyway. And in the middle of the 18th century, about the time that he was about my age, but don't worry, I'm not going to go weird like he did, he began hearing voices and was convinced that he was hearing from angels who lived on other planets. This was also about the time that the astronomers were beginning to discover, and learn a little bit more about the rest of our solar system. So Swedenborg believed he was hearing from angels living on Venus and Mars and Jupiter and so forth. And he's written books that the Swedenborg Society, and I forget what the society is called today. They've I think upgraded their marketing. They don't call themselves the Swedenborgians anymore. But you can still, even though their movement's very small, you can still buy his books today. Life on Other Planets. You move into the 19th century, you've got Joseph Smith with the Church of Latter-day Saints and his belief that there were many worlds out there, and that if we men, not women, just men, live a righteous enough life and follow the rules, you can become the god of your own planet someday. The Spiritist movement, beginning in 1848 with the Fox sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox, believing that they were hearing from spirits. And even though later on they admitted that they'd faked the whole thing, the true believers didn't care. The Spiritist movement, this idea that the spirits can communicate with us from beyond, continued to be a very powerful influence. In fact, in the 1920s, 40 years after the Fox sisters admitted that they had hoaxed the whole thing, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, wrote a history of the Spiritist movement and attributed its origins to Kate and Margaret Fox, these two teenage girls in upstate New York in 1848. Then Helena Petrovna Blavatsky comes along. 1870s, forms the Theosophist Society. 1888, she writes her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrines, in which she says, yes, the spiritists are right. They are hearing from spirits, but they are not the spirits of the dead. They are the spirits of the masters of ascended wisdom. And they want to help mankind evolve to the next level of development so that we too can become ascended masters, living elsewhere in the universe. Perhaps in Blavatsky's case, it was near the star system Sirius. But she believed that mankind originated on the lost continent of Lemuria, and that the Earth would go through these cycles where the races of men would rise and then fall again, and that the most recent race, the fourth race, had been destroyed by the evil black magicians from the lost continent of Atlantis. Now, Lemuria, just to give you an idea, when Josh talks about no evidence, I mean, we are talking that these doctrines are based literally on no evidence. Lemuria, it was a term that was coined by a zoologist in 1864. So we're talking the same time the North and the South in the United States are fighting each other for the right, over states' rights and slavery and so forth. This zoologist noticed that you could find certain fossils of monkeys in India and on the island of Madagascar that were virtually identical. But there's a lot of ocean between Madagascar and India. So he theorized that there must have been a continent that had somehow slipped below the waves of the Indian Ocean that allowed at one point in history these primates to cross back and forth. They were lemurs, hence Lemuria. Seriously, that's where the name came from. And Blavatsky said that was where mankind originated, on Lemuria. I bring that up because we'll come back to it later. It is still very relevant today in the UFO community. Well, Blavatsky, very influential, attracted a lot of followers, especially in Europe, the UK and the United States especially. Blavatsky's going to show up in Sharon's series of novels, the Red Wing Saga. She's drawing a lot of historical characters in to add some interest. Crowley will show up a little later, too. Anyway, move forward about 40 years into the 1920s. A skinny kid who had suffered from night terrors, interestingly enough, when he was a child, by the name of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, was writing horror fiction. Now, Lovecraft considered himself a man of science, an atheist, didn't believe in the supernatural, but he was more than happy to draw on the beliefs of people who did as source material, inspiration for his stories. In 1926, Lovecraft writes The Call of Cthulhu, which was his most famous story, inspired dozens of other horror writers, in fact, encouraged them to write in his fictional universe, created the Cthulhu mythos. Cthulhu was this tentacled, octopoid, winged monster that lie at the bottom of the ocean, like Lost Continent, dead but dreaming, waiting for the stars to align themselves properly so that the old gods that Cthulhu served, extraterrestrial gods, would return to Earth and resume their reign over the planet. Well, this was a common theme in Lovecraft's work. Lovecraft wrote about Cyclopean architecture, megalithic structures, mysterious structures built by these old gods, and then apparently abandoned, but only temporarily, waiting for the day when these things would return. This was, Lovecraft didn't find a following right away, because the 1920s, when Lovecraft was most prolific, was a time when his type of pulp horror fiction was not considered acceptable literature by society. He was not the kind of writer that got invited to fancy parties, okay? But during World War II, now Lovecraft died in 1937. World War II, the War Department was looking for entertainment that they could send to soldiers on the cheap to get their minds off of what was happening in Europe and in the Pacific. And so they, Lovecraft's dead. He's not going to fight us over the rights. So they were sending stuff by Lovecraft to the soldiers in Europe. And lo and behold, that stuff began to attract a following among the French. And in the 1950s, a couple of French magazine publishers and authors by the name of Pauwels and Bergier published a magazine called Planet or Planete, drew a lot and translated a lot of Lovecraft's fiction and republished it. In 1960, they wrote their own book called Morning of the Magicians. Was translated in English 1963. The title was changed, but it sold very well, and it drew on a lot of Lovecraft's themes that humanity was created by these old gods who had likewise created these megalithic structures all over the planet, and that a day was coming when these old gods would return from the stars to planet Earth. A lot of that stuff wound up in this book, Dawn of Morning of the Magicians. It dealt with pyramidology and Cyclopean architecture and et cetera and so on. Well, as with anything in the entertainment world, whether it's film or music or art, when something begins to sell, it is copied by others. And that's exactly what happened with Pauwels and Bergier. In fact, the most successful copy of their work was so successful and so copied that they threatened a lawsuit against the guy who did it. A hotel manager from Switzerland by the name of Erich von Däniken, who wrote Chariots of the Gods, which has become the most popular book of archaeology, and we should use that word loosely, in history. Von Däniken has sold 60 million books in dozens of languages all over the planet over the last 45 years. He's had major motion pictures made about Chariots of the Gods, Gold of the Gods. In fact, he just published a new book this year in 2017, which he is marketing as the first official follow-up of Chariots of the Gods. Critics are reading this and saying, you mean, besides the other 24 follow-ups that basically just rehash the same old material. But as Josh said, no evidence. And when you look at what he wrote and where his inspiration came from, there is a direct line of inspiration that goes from Blavatsky and Theosophy through Lovecraft to Chariots of the Gods. It's based on the call of Cthulhu, the Cthulhu mythos. What's even weirder, and we deal with this in the book, but I'll be brief here, is that in the book we show that there are some very strange synchronicities between the work of H.P. Lovecraft and the occultist Aleister Crowley. Mm-hmm. Things that they wrote independently of one another, and there's no evidence that they knew of one another or were familiar with one another's work, but things that indicate that the two of them were drawing on the same spiritual source. Now, that's not us saying this. This is from the occult researcher Peter Levenda, who in his book, The Dark Lord, shows very specifically where things written by Lovecraft were echoed things written by Crowley in his holy books. Things that Crowley said were being channeled from spirits, and Levenda draws the conclusion. He said, we could say that Lovecraft was but there's no evidence that Lovecraft was copying or emulating Crowley. There's no evidence that Lovecraft ever considered himself anything but an atheist. Doesn't mean he wasn't being influenced by a spiritual source, and that's Levenda's point. If, in fact, Levenda is correct, and he was Lovecraft that is, drawing on the same spiritual source as Aleister Crowley, then you've got another connection and another source of inspiration behind the modern ancient alien theory, which is the spiritual source, the dark spiritual source behind Aleister Crowley. And Levenda goes a step further and identifies it as the god of chaos, the ancient Egyptian god of chaos named Set. And isn't it weird that the main group trying to reach out to make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence out there, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the acronym is SETI, which in Egyptian means man of Set, man of the chaos god, Set. Coincidence?
Probably not.
We're not coincidence theorists.
Yeah, it's things like that. You just have to understand the culture that you're going to dive into. So I guess let's I have 3 more questions. 1, I want to ask, and then 2, I had people post on my channel they wanted to ask you questions. So we'll go to community questions afterwards. So let's just kind of end this topic with this question for both of you. How do we use this information in your book to reach people with Christ? So Josh, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, and that's the challenge for Christians, right? How do we make the Bible exciting, especially when we have to compete with Avengers and Thor, literally Thor. we have to compete with the old gods. So how do we do that? The thing is, all of those old things, they're not more exciting than the Bible. It's just we as Christians have stripped out all the cool, supernatural, amazing, fun, just wild, cool stuff out of the Bible to make it more palatable to a materialistic worldview. Because we're afraid, well, somebody won't be able to accept the fact that, angels are real or that the devil is real, that the devil is an actual person. So let's spiritualize all of it. And I don't mean make it into spiritual things, but I mean, let's make it all metaphor. Let's make everything mean something else. So then that way it's more palatable to somebody who's scientific or somebody who's more materialistic in their worldview. Wrong approach. All right. We don't conform the Bible to the culture. We're supposed to conform the culture to the Bible. All that stuff is real. And all of that stuff connects so much better than any of the ancient paganism and any of the ancient Greeks. I mean, I was really big into Greek mythology when I was a kid because it was exciting. It was really cool. But there's a lot of holes in those stories. Even the Egyptian one, there's holes in it. There are things that don't add up. You have to suspend a lot of belief, for any of it to add up. Just read the Enuma Elish or the Baal cycle of creation. It is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense, like any kind of materialistic or scientific sense whatsoever. The Bible does, if we do a couple of things. First, we have to acknowledge that there is a reality beyond what we can see and hear. There's a reality. And I mean, shoot, you can look to quantum physics and find that. You don't even need to be spiritual to believe that. You don't even really need to go to quantum physics to believe that. We're not seeing how we're connected right now. We're on essentially different ends of the country almost, but we're states apart, yet we're able to talk and communicate with each other just fine. We can't see, we can't see how that works, but it just does. So that's one of the things. The other thing is we need to realize that we sort of are in competition with all these other beliefs. And of course we know that we have the truth, and I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm not trying to say that we're comparable in any sense, but we are in competition because when I was a kid, I would watch TV every day. I would watch, Spider-Man and Batman, and I loved X-Men. I loved all that stuff. I was getting that every day, yet I chose to stop going to church at 12 years old because I was sick of it. I felt like I knew everything already. I was being taught the same sermons over and over and over again, and it was New Testament. It was like all New Testament, never got into the Old Testament. To Derek's credit, one thing that he's really done and one thing that he's really contributed to, I think, Christianity as a whole, is he's been able to show the Old Testament isn't just good for history. That was a lie I was taught when I was a kid. Like, oh yeah, the Old Testament, it's fine if you like history, but that's about it. And that was like Christians, like that was the church telling me that. Mm-hmm. What a lie. What a stupid thing to say, seriously, because that is the basis for all the New Testament stuff. And it's not just history. It's collections of stories about a battle that's still going on, and Derek nailed it in The Great Inception by showing how all these things that we think we know everything about, Jericho and the Red Sea. I mean, who doesn't know about the Red Sea crossing? There is so much more that is going on with all of those stories. And Derek's been able to connect all those dots and show how it all lines up, that that there is what we say we all know, but none of it we don't understand, that there's this huge spiritual war going on behind the scenes that's active today, even though we don't physically see it and hear it all the time. So, sometimes some people have experiences, but we think we can live our lives independently of that, but we can't. It's existing all over. Shoot, if you are into politics at all, then you know that there's got to be something spiritual behind this stuff. There's a war raging on. We humans are prisoners of that war. Some people, most people don't even know that the war's going on. So that's part of the challenge. It's literally altering and changing somebody's worldview into, okay, it's not all about you and your life and your physical life. There's a lot more going on than just that. It's like, when you're trying to raise a child and you have to keep telling them, look, it's not all about you. There's other people in the world. It's not all about what you want. You can't throw a fit because people don't like that. You might want to do it, but you can't do it because there's other people in the world. It's that, but for adults. It's okay. It's not just the physical world. It's not just the material world. It's not just your job and your political views and your family. I mean, all that stuff is important, and it should be, but it's not just that. There's so much more going on that you should be aware of, because we only get this life to figure it out, we only get this one life to figure it out, and we have literally an entire world fighting against us and trying to indoctrinate our children and our adults. So that's the challenge. How do we make that not palatable, but exciting to the rest of the people out there? It's just by being honest with the text. Let's not sugarcoat anything. Let's not dumb it down for anybody. Like Dr. Michael Heiser says, let's not protect people from their Bibles. It's ridiculous. Right. God didn't protect us from the Bible. We should not do that for other people. So we just got to be honest with what the text says. And we have to know, because people are going to call us out on our BS, we have to know the difference between opinion and fact. We have to know the difference between an interpretation and an objective fact about something. There's a lot of things that I think I know, and I probably don't. There's a lot of interpretations I think are correct, and I have evidence to back it up. But there's other ways to look at things. That kind of goes back to the original thing we were talking about Christmas. There's other ways to look at the issue. One of them's right. There is one objective truth somewhere out there, but we're not privy to all of that right now. The one truth that we know we have is Jesus Christ as our Savior. He died on the cross for us and all the salvation stuff. Everything beyond that is a personal relationship with God, and it's learning, and it's getting things wrong, and it's learning from our mistakes, just like you would train a child. My kids, they're kids. They screw up all the time. I don't care that they screw up. I care that they learn from it. I actually kind of want them to screw up, because I want them to know what that's like. That's kind of their sliver of the real life, of the real world, and learn how to learn from it. With us, we have to teach other people the same. So it's not, you have to believe in my version of Christianity or you're not a Christian. You have to be pre-trib, or you have to be pre-wrath, or you're not a Christian. It's so far beyond all that crap. It's beyond our own personal interpretations. The exciting thing is when we can tell somebody objectively and honestly, that's a good question. I don't know. Just like with my grandma when I was a kid. That was the most impactful thing that I have ever heard. That was the most honest answer I ever heard when I was a kid. It's just a simple I don't know. And I don't know goes a long way, because it's honest, and it also validates that the other person's question is relevant, to the conversation. So you kind of got me on a soapbox there, but I hope that answers your question at least a little bit.
Yeah,
it's just being honest with what the Bible is, what Christianity is, what we believe, as opposed to what we know. I know Jesus is the Savior, and I know not everybody's going to accept that. Now, here's why I know that. Here's what I believe that supports that. So it's all of those things, and a lot more. And I'm sure Derek will be able to add a lot more to that.
If you've noticed, I've moved a little bit. It's because the phone that I'm having to Skype in on, because I at least still have some data left on my phone. I don't have any data left as a hotspot on my phone. Thanks, net neutrality. I had to move to find a cable where I could plug in, because I burned through 80% of my battery. Just looking at it like a Josh gave you the big picture, so let me try and do small picture here, specifically with the book. In the book, we try to, and we don't get into the minutia of the famous UFO cases like Roswell, Rendlesham, Maury Island, Mount Rainier, etc. Kecksburg, and some of the others. We don't do that. Those have been investigated and investigated again by people who have studied those much more in depth than we had. If we wanted to do that, we would have had 5 books just on those types of cases. But what we do show in the book is the heavy involvement of the American intelligence community right from the start of the modern UFO phenomenon in investigating these cases, and the investigation, or the involvement rather, of a division of the United States Department of Defense called Joint Security Control, whose mission is to deceive. I mean, these are guys who did stuff like, set up the fake army at Dover to convince the Germans we were going to attack there instead of at Normandy. Joint Security Control was involved in getting the FBI to investigate the early UFO cases out in the American Northwest in 1947, a couple of weeks before the Roswell incident. So we've got the American Defense Department with its division just below the Joint Chiefs of Staff, tasked specifically with creating deceptions involved with the UFO movement in 1947. So, and we just asked the question, doesn't that suggest, if you're a critical thinker, that maybe what we've been told about these really isn't true? That over 70 years of contact, of visitation, if the true believers are correct, and remember, more than a third of American adults believe we're being regulated. 1 in 3 convinced we're being visited by extraterrestrials. Where are the ships? Where are the ETs? Where is the physical evidence? Just ask that critical question. Where are they? Let's start there.
Yeah.
If you encounter somebody who's a believer, the government's hiding it all. Really? In this modern age where you can't move without somebody taking a selfie, they're still able to hide all this. Okay, well, let's ask a second question then. We've got all of these people, literally millions, because look, when you say 1 in 3 Americans believes that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, that means we're talking 100 million people. 100 million people. Many of them claim they're hearing messages from these extraterrestrials. Okay, let's say that's true. Let's say that they have traveled across the universe, across the galaxy, from Alpha Centauri, Zeta Reticuli, whatever, from Sirius B, wherever it is. Why are all of these messages delivered telepathically? These guys crossed light years of space and they can't work a webcam. They can't work a radio. They can't modulate a light. They can't tap out Morse code.
Mm-hmm.
They have to communicate telepathically. Okay, all right, let's say that that's true.
That's the real reason for the repeal of net neutrality, actually, so they can talk to aliens. But
exactly, so that their brain waves aren't being throttled by Verizon. But say that is true, then why are the messages contradictory? Why are some of them from Venus and others say, no, we're from Saturn, and others say, no, we're from Sirius B, and others say, no, we're from the contiguous universe? Why does their point of origin keep getting farther away as our knowledge of the solar system increases? And we understand, oh, wait, there's nothing that could possibly live on Venus or Saturn or Pluto. Mm-hmm. Why are the messages changing? And here's the key thing. How do these contactees know that these entities aren't lying to them? I mean, just let's do some critical thinking here. Mm-hmm. Now, if as the true believers in the Mutual UFO Network are beginning to believe, and this is where the continent Lemuria comes back into play, why, if they're actually scientifically examining this phenomenon, is one of the members of their advisory circle, their inner circle, a channeler who's hearing messages from a 36,000-year-old Lemurian warrior called Ramtha the Enlightened One? Mm-hmm. Why is she one of the inner circle of the Mutual UFO Network? What does this have to do with UFO? Why is she allowed to come to the meetings? Mm-hmm. It's because it's not a scientific or technological quest for answers. You don't see NASA recruiting the next generation of astrophysicists in Roswell every summer, but you do find plenty of palm readers and tarot card readers. It's because it's a false religion. So when people are questioning and asking these questions about the UFO phenomenon, start there. Where's the physical evidence? Why are all of these messages coming telepathically, i.e. spiritually? And how do we know that they're telling the truth? And if, in fact, we admit that these messages are being delivered spiritually, doesn't that argue for the existence then of the supernatural? Isn't that by definition supernatural? And if the supernatural realm exists, then shouldn't we consider the eyewitness testimony of these men in the first century who saw a man literally rise from the dead? Let's go from there.
Yeah, and 100 million people, that's a big group of people you're able to reach with the gospel, is because they believe and be able to relate with them and be able to come down to their level and be like, and validate them, like Josh said, and to be able to understand where they're coming from. Like Derek said, it's so important to be able to reach that very, very large group of people with the truth. So if you're sitting down thinking that aliens are not that important, well, they're important to 100 million people, so therefore they should be important to you as well.
It's a Mars Hill moment. Paul didn't go up on Mars Hill in Athens and start smashing the pagan statues. He said, I see you're very religious. What do you know about this unknown God? I think I can tell you about him.
Yeah.
Hey, we can use the same technique with people in the UFO phenomenon today. Why are you so interested about this? What answers do you hope to find? Josh and I were asking people on the street of Roswell, and we were getting, I don't know. We're trying to find some answers about the meaning of life. Mm-hmm. Really? You don't want to know where they came up with the energy source to move a spacecraft across 4 light years, because that could really be useful, to lower our energy bills here.
Yeah, not a single person had an actual scientific question, and that doesn't mean they're stupid. We're not criticizing.
Right.
It's just it speaks largely to what this is all about. The UFO stuff, the alien stuff, it is a religion. Like Derek said, it's a false religion. They get into it because they want to know why we're here. Where are we going when we die? What are we? All those important questions. And they think that aliens have the answer.
Right. Same questions we have. So don't belittle them. Don't mock them. Let's use it as a Mars Hill moment. I see you're looking for some answers. Well, what is it about this that you're trying to find out? Mm-hmm. Well, how do you know that these answers that they're presenting are true? And just use it to, just ask questions, use it to open a conversation.
So I definitely agree with both of you on that front. So let's get to the 2 questions that I have from viewers. One is good. Neither of them are really related to what we were talking about, but I think they were just for you. And then the other one, I think they just wanted to ask a question. So this one from Zachary says, I'm a young pastor in training at Bible college, and I feel led by God to subjects such as these. And I see and feel that the church is overlooking. Let me read that again. I see and feel the overlooking of the church concerning these controversial and what I consider essential to the supernatural worldview. I feel persecuted and made fun of with interest in such topics. I want my flock when I pastor to not be protected from the Bible, as Dr. Heiser puts it. What's the best way to feed the congregation these biblical controversial knowledge without turning them off? I don't want to shy away from the truth.
Well, since I talked a lot about that, I'll let Derek take this one.
Well, again, I think the idea is to just, first of all, let people know that it's okay to talk about these topics, because one of the reasons so many have gone to the UFO community and the ET hypothesis for answers is because they've been mocked and driven out of churches. But the truth is, if 1 in 3 people out there are, if 3/4 of America say, yeah, there's some evidence for being visited by extraterrestrial, look, it shouldn't be a subject that is taboo, but maybe don't hit them with this on the first day. Maybe bring this up when there's an opportunity, like the opening of the new Star Wars movie, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay, culturally speaking, that's a big deal. And maybe you bring in the research that says, research shows that 1 out of every 3 of you probably believes that we're being visited by ET. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about why this is an important topic, something we should at least be aware of. Because if you're not the one who believes this, and maybe it's your husband, maybe it's your son, maybe it's your brother or sister, maybe it's somebody at work who's got questions, don't hit him over the head with it. Again, Mars Hill moment. I see that there are a lot of people in our society who believe this, and this is with the opening of this movie, I just wanted to take a minute. This may seem weird, but and just present it with facts, because the facts are There are a lot of people out there who believe it. Otherwise, if there weren't, Ancient Aliens wouldn't be in its 12th season.
True. Very true. And then the next question is, they said, why did you pick the subjects, why did they pick the subjects they chose? And then the second question was, what subject is it, by the way? Which I think we pretty much...
The subject is aliens, and for me, see my previous answer.
Yeah, I think that we covered that pretty well.
I'll take that one for 400, Alex.
Yeah. So I think we covered it pretty well. We're not going to go into that. I just thought that was funny. If you guys listening want to ask questions, I always post on my channel. I have the community tab. I post who I'm going to be interviewing next, so almost always. And so you can just feel free to comment your questions. And as you see, I will say your name and ask the question, and then you can feel famous. But that being said, that wraps it up. I should have known that with two loquacious speakers like Josh Peck and Derek Gilbert, we were never going to get done in under an hour, but that's okay. It was very fun, so I really appreciate you guys for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having us. And again, Sam, you're doing an amazing job with the show, and I couldn't be happier or more proud of what you've done with it so far. You're knocking it out of the park, man.
Thank you.
Indeed. My honor to be here, Sam.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Well, guys, that's it. We had a lot more I could have talked about. Josh in the book ties Israel to aliens in a very cyclical way, and it's very fascinating. And Derek the way Derek talks is a very factual way, and sometimes you just want a transcript of what Derek's going to say so you can read it over and over because he has so much facts in it, and it's so interesting that it's hard to keep up sometimes. But that's what the book is all about, so that is fantastic to read. It gives you another weapon in your holster on how to deal with certain things that the enemy is throwing at us. So I strongly urge you to pick it up. And, before we sign off with these guys, where can they find you? Josh, where can they find you? You talked about it a little bit already.
OfficialDisclosure.com is me and Derek's website. Derek's done a phenomenal job setting that up because I don't know WordPress, but Derek does. And so OfficialDisclosure.com, super easy to remember. That is our website. That's where you can get the special deal that has our book plus my new book, Unraveling the Multiverse, to Dr. Michael Heiser's book, the Facade and the Portent, Project Stargate interviews, the Official Disclosure audio series, just a ton of stuff, over $300 in products, only $39.95, I think, or $99, at officialdisclosure.com. People will be able to get all the information there.
Yep.
And watch them on SkyWatch, that they're always over there doing Into the Multiverse, Sci-Friday, and just the SkyWatch program. It is fantastic programs if you want to stay up to date on things like this. So that's it, guys. Hey, I'm not going to ask you to like, subscribe, or share, but I appreciate it if you do.
Ask them. Tell them to do it.
I never do.
You better listen to Daddy Derek.
I never ask them to do it, but they know I appreciate it if they do. And guys, I hope you enjoyed the program. Aliens are maybe around us, or maybe it's just demons. Hey, read the book and find out. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you have a great week. So do either of you have a joke that would be a good ending?
Not anything that wouldn't be just offensive.
Okay, I've got one.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Chicago, and I was 35 years old before I realized that the old line, vote early, vote often, was not actual advice from the Cook County Board of Election Commissioners.
Perfect.